Welcome to Globevisa's pioneering series of Meeting Pros. I'm your host, Finn. Our objective for this series is to connect you with professionals around the world regarding immigration issues and to gain insights regarding important topics of the immigration industry. And today we have the unique opportunity of having Mr. Daniel Healy with us here today. Welcome, Dan. It is such a pleasure.
Thanks very much. Appreciate you having me.
Now, Dan here is the CEO and founder of Civitas Capital Group. Civitas is a major player in EB-5 investment projects. So first off, Dan, could you please briefly talk about Civitas, because I'm afraid I might not do it justice.
Fair enough. I am the chief executive and founder of the firm. We have been around for 15 years. We just celebrated our 15th anniversary. We are a regional center operator based in Dallas, Texas. We have started out focused on projects in Dallas through a partnership with the municipal government of Dallas. And in the last 15 years have expanded our investment footprint in the US nationally. So now we've done over 50 EB-5 investments from coast to coast and invested approaching $1 billion of EB-5 capital.
Wow, that is absolutely astonishing. That's very impressive.
Thank you.
Well, now I would like to, I guess, formally begin by addressing the golden elephant in the room, so to say. So, President Trump's gold card. Now, there are like news circling around regarding the current administration's plan to actually introduce this new gold card visa. So for just a measly $5 million, an applicant can gain the same privileges of the green card. My first question to you is that with President Trump like floating around this idea of a gold card, will there be some impact on the current EB-5 setup?
So the short answer is that as of today, we don't yet know. So far, the president and his team have announced this idea, and that's all.
Okay.
They have not issued even a summary in writing of how they want the program to actually work. So the only information that we have about the gold card is what they have said in their initial press conference and in a handful of statements here and there in the last few weeks. We really don't know much yet.
Okay.
Now, what they have said has caused, understandably, some confusion in the EB-5 world. The Secretary of Commerce, Secretary Lutnick, in the initial announcement, unfortunately, had some kind of negative comments about EB-5 and suggested that the gold card would replace EB-5. However, just the next day, and certainly in the next weeks since then, the administration's language has moved away from that. They already have shifted to maybe the gold card becomes complementary to EB-5, or the details are very murky at this point on how it's going to work. What I can tell you is that the EB-5 community, stakeholders, people like us certainly that run regional centers, but also mayors and county officials and developers and project sponsors have made it known to the Trump administration that EB-5 is very valuable, and importantly, it's completely consistent with the idea of having a gold card. If you want to create a $5 million program that has enhanced benefits and that isn't an investment but is rather a straight payment of $5 million to the U.S. Treasury, that's fine. And in fact, personally, I think it's a pretty good idea. But there's no reason that can't coexist with EB-5, and I'm pretty optimistic that that's where we're going to end up.
Great. That sounds actually quite reassuring. Since there are like this gold card and EB-5, as you just mentioned, are both investment visas, at least at the current stage when the president is referring to as the gold card. So it seems to be in direct competition with each other. And then you just said they could be complementary. So with this price tag of gold card potentially reaching $5 million, so do you see there's a possibility of a price increase regarding EB-5?
Well, I suppose anything is possible. In the immediate term, no. And that is because to create the gold card program or to implement a price increase for EB-5, in either case or both, requires an act of Congress. Okay, so this is not something that the president has the authority to just do unilaterally. The current rules governing EB-5, as set forth in the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act that passed in 2022, those are the law of the land as we sit here right now. And until that is changed, that'll continue to be the law of the land. So in the immediate term, I don't see a lot of risk for that. But having said that, what we've seen with this president is that he is more than willing to be very aggressive about exercising his authority. So for people who are considering EB-5 for their family, I would urge you to move sooner rather than later, because there is uncertainty, of course. As for the two things being competitive, I don't really see it that way. There is a big difference between $5 million and $800,000. I mean, that's a wide spread. And there's also a big difference between making a $5 million payment that you are not going to get back and making an $800,000 investment in a job-creating enterprise where the idea is that after a few years you do get a return on and a return of your investment. So you're really talking about serving two different segments of the market. The number of people that can afford to simply write a check for $5 million is obviously much smaller than the number of people who can afford the current EB-5 structure. So it's different.
Certainly. I mean, from what I have learned about through press conferences or certain statements from the President Trump's cabinet, how they describe the gold card project is like paying as you just said, a direct payment to the government of the United States instead of investing into certain investment projects and to basically a targeted area to bring employment and also regional developments as such.
Right.
So that will be quite different. Very different.
And it is not coincidental that the gold card idea has been introduced now. The timing is not coincidental. And by that I mean, when in their announcement, when they talked about, hey, maybe we can sell 1 million gold cards at $5 million each, that adds up to $5 trillion. That is a huge, unfathomable sum, but they're focused on that and not on investment, because one of the main drivers for this is to generate revenue for the Treasury that will allow them to pay for things in the broader federal budget that they want to pay for. That is a major, motivator behind this policy that really isn't related to EB-5. EB-5 does not play that role.
Understood. So from a lot of ways, both the legal structures of the current United States government and both from how the gold card could be introduced. So from the murky information that we currently have, so would you consider like the gold card being either impractical or that is in a completely different lane with EB-5?
I would not consider it impractical.
Okay.
I think it's a very real idea.
Okay.
I think the administration is very serious about it.
Okay.
It's just early in the process.
Understood.
We just don't know yet.
Okay.
I can tell you, from my personal, experience and knowledge that the idea has generated quite a bit of, discussion and excitement among members of Congress in the House and the Senate, and you can be assured that they have their opinions about how this might work, because the whole program is going to require legislation that has to go through them. I think we're going to see a lot of different ideas about the details of how this could work. It's possible that folks could make proposals that tie the gold card closer to EB-5 or create tiers. I mean, there's a lot of ideas floating out there, but there's going to be a process of winnowing those ideas down to what actually gets proposed and then what actually gets voted on, if anything. As you know, it's very difficult to get anything done in Congress.
Yeah, sure.
So there's no guarantee but I do think it is a serious proposal from the president.
Understood. I think that really clears up a lot of confusions about gold card such early in the process. And also, I think that is a quite reassuring comment from you regarding the entirety of the EB-5 program. From now on, I think like with the confusion out of the air, so what is the most beneficial move for investors nowadays, considering EB-5 projects to move?
The timing is everything.
Yeah.
And what we have now, since the passage of the Reform and Integrity Act in 2022, created a very significant incentive for investment in rural areas, for EB-5 capital to be deployed in rural America. That incentive, as you know, has been very successful. Overnight, it really moved the market. People like me who were not particularly focused on identifying investments in rural areas became very focused on them. And now we've invested hundreds of millions of EB-5 dollars, just in the last couple of years on that. I mention that because from a timing perspective, particularly for investors from China, where there's very high demand and there's a likelihood that, in the relatively near future, in the intermediate term, we will begin to hit the caps, the annual caps that govern, the capacity of the EB-5 program. Moving sooner rather than later, again, is in your interest or in an investor's interest if they are serious about proceeding. That's not to say that there won't be opportunity down the road. Of course there will be, but we've seen how this can pretty quickly become a long period of time. To avoid that, sooner rather than later is better. Secondly, I think one of the great things about the Integrity Act has been that it really raised the bar in terms of the requirements for people like me, frankly, to participate in this program, which is great because we needed it. So from an investor's perspective, for 15 years, we've been urging people to really do their homework. We're talking about, before it was $500,000, now it's $800,000. That is a serious amount of money for most families. That's a substantial investment. Do your homework. Make sure that you're partnering with a regional center, with advisors, with an attorney who are very experienced. Don't be anybody's guinea pig. That's my mantra.
Thank you for that really helpful advice. So as you just mentioned, in 2022, the Biden administration introduced the Reform and Integrity Act regarding the EB-5. That essentially divided the EB-5 program into the old policy camp and the new policy camp. And recently there has been a major retrogression regarding the old EB-5, the policy under the old EB-5 policy. That retrogression is quite astonishing, like the amount of time that has been turned back. So that actually raised some concern among a lot of like EB-5 applicants. So what are the specific reasons for that retrogression?
So retrogression happens because it's a simple math problem. It's a simple capacity constraint. So the prior to the passage of the Reform and Integrity Act, there was essentially one EB-5 queue for each country. When the Reform and Integrity Act passed, there were new queues that were introduced for the set-aside categories. Rural, in particular, has been a major focus in China because of the speed advantages that the law created, the expedited processing times. So those new categories are current. In the visa bulletins, there are visas available, and so that's largely what is being focused on in the market today. But for the previously existing categories, that's not the case. They are still in the same queue that they were in, and there's a big backlog there. So that's why it exists. As a policy matter, we as a firm and together with our peers in the industry are very focused on trying to identify solutions to that issue because it's not fair, that the investors who invested in good faith are now in this kind of long-term wait. That's a suboptimal outcome, clearly, but it is going to require action on the part of the administration or Congress or both to fix that problem. The good news is that fixing that problem does not require necessarily passing a new law. There are things that the administration can do directly that would help, and we're working on that.
Okay, that is some great news. Let's turn back to the gold card for just a moment. So EB-5, there's a queue regarding the applicants under the old policy. So with the possibility of introducing a new gold card visa, will it somewhat impact or take up the current visa quotas?
Direct answer to that question is that no one knows, but in my opinion, it's highly unlikely because you're going to create the gold card program. Administration and Congress would be creating that from scratch. So there's nothing that says that they could create a whole new queue just for the gold card, which is likely what they would do. They could decide that the gold card is unlimited and doesn't have a queue at all. You know, I mean, we don't, like, literally they're writing this, you know, from a blank page. So there's no way of knowing how the Congress is going to structure the details of that at this point. You know, they haven't released anything close to that level of detail. But I think the likelihood that would take visa capacity away from EB-5 is low, because frankly, there's no reason that they need to make it that complicated. They can just do it themselves.
That sounds very reasonable, since considering like how profit-oriented the current administration is.
And they don't want there to be a constraint. They'll decide that there aren't any limits to gold cards. I mean, 1 million is a lot of gold cards.
That is certainly a reason to take in, since how sort of profit-oriented a new administration is. I think that is a very, very likely scenario to
you can't move the needle on the U.S. federal budget.
Yeah.
In the context of EB-5 scale. It just it's so small, it just doesn't move the needle.
Right.
So for the gold card to have the effect they want to have, it's going to have dramatically higher capacity.
Yeah, like if we put it that way, in order to accomplish what the gold card was set out to accomplish, having that subject to the same queue of EB-5 just doesn't make any sense,
right? Not possible.
Right.
Those things are not compatible.
Right. So, okay, so now let's turn back to EB-5 a little bit. For the new policy under EB-5, when, if at all, will the new policy face some sort of retrogression in the future?
Prediction based on the best data that we have, and that data comes from USCIS, and it is lagging. You know, we don't have real-time data, but based on what I understand now, it is possible that the set-aside categories, rural in particular, will start to see retrogression at some point toward the end of this year or into next year. I don't expect that we'll see it, immediately. There's a lot of activity in the market. We are certainly very active in the market. So again, for investors that are considering this, the time is now. So
I think now we have reached our final segment of this interview. So I would like to pivot a little bit towards the future of EB-5. So do you have any potential predictions regarding the future of EB-5 programs? Because from other employment-based categories like EB-1 and also EB-2 recently has faced some kinds of changes, like the USCIS had put out, it raised the bar a little bit. So will that same thing happen to EB-5?
It's possible that we will see administrative changes from USCIS under the Trump administration. At this point, it's amazing, but President Trump only took office 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So they have flooded the zone with change. Not just in EB-5, but in general.
Yeah.
Right. So there's so much going on. It seems certainly possible that as the Trump organization, the appointees and the senior people kind of put their stamp on how USCIS works with respect to EB-5, that we could see some policy change. Having said that, taking a step back, I think that EB-5 has the brightest future that it has ever had since I've been doing this, because of the gold card announcement. It is so bold, it is so different from anything that has ever been proposed, in U.S. investment immigration by a huge margin. I mean, we were talking a minute ago about orders of magnitude, and that's literally orders of magnitude. The President of the United States sat in the Oval Office of the White House and said, investment immigration is really a good idea for America. And not a little bit of investment immigration, 1 million gold cards. 1 million. It's hard to overemphasize how much more that is than the current scope of the EB-5 program. My hope is that, and my intent, frankly, is that as an industry, as a community of stakeholders, we can make a compelling case to President Trump and his team that EB-5 is part of the solution. EB-5 has a 30-year track record now, and especially in the last few years since the passage of the Integrity Act, of doing what it's supposed to do, creating jobs, channeling capital into a whole range of U.S. industries, especially when the economy is rocky. That's when EB-5 shines the most. For my money, I'm pretty confident that if I get a chance to make that case, we're going to be working very closely with this administration, not just to have an EB-5 program that works, but to expand it significantly. For years now, we've been working, for example, on advocating to change the derivative policy.
Right.
The policy that requires currently the spouses and children associated with a primary investor are counted, visas that are issued to those spouses and children are counted against the annual 10,000 visa allocation. Well, that's not in the law. That is an administrative interpretation that goes back to the early 1990s that could be changed. There's no reason why a president who is prepared to issue 1 million gold cards, couldn't make what, in the context of that, is a pretty minor change, but that would have dramatic implications for the EB-5 program, in particular the investors who are in the current backlog. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for creativity here that we really haven't seen ever, since I've been doing this.
Right. I mean, starting from at the beginning of this interview, my thoughts regarding gold cards and the EB-5 programs, they were competitors, or the gold card will somehow in the future may supplant the EB-5, and now you have completely convinced me that this is absolutely not the case. And also, I think back to, before the establishment of the EB-5 program, there's no other way of investment immigration for the United States. And the establishment of EB-5 was a revolutionary moment, right? And so what you just say could be the gold card visa could be somewhat of another lightning rod for EB-5.
It would be a watershed moment for sure. If they get this done, I think it would be a watershed moment. And, the president wants to usher in his words, a golden age of American prosperity, right? EB-5 is about American prosperity.
Absolutely.
EB-5 is a program that costs U.S. taxpayers nothing, that attracts billions of dollars annually of investment capital to U.S. industry. It's required to create jobs. What's not to like if you're trying to usher in American prosperity? I'm a real estate guy, so I'm always an optimist, but in this case, I think it's justified.
So with coming off that note, we are all being optimistic here. With the new administration in power, will Civitas consider launching other EB-5 programs?
Oh, for sure. Okay. Yeah, we are active in the market right now, and we have a very active pipeline. We are all in on EB-5. We think the future is bright. Now, to do what we want to do as a company requires that we increase the program's capacity in some way or another. And that's what I mean when I say, I think from our company's perspective, we have big dreams. We have aggressive goals. And to achieve those, we're going to have to engage, with this administration and every administration,
right.
To continue to strengthen and we hope, expand the capacity of the EB-5 program over time, because it is proving itself, that it does what it's supposed to do. I'm pretty confident about that, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, just playing the devil's advocate here. Please don't hate me.
No, it's okay.
So, with such an aggressive goal of expanding within Civitas, do you see any potential risk?
Of course, we're in a business that is based on risk. The EB-5 program literally requires every investor to take risk. That's one of the things that distinguishes it from the gold card. The gold card, there's no risk. It's just a guaranteed loss.
Okay.
You're going to write a $5 million check and you're not getting it back.
Right, just like a direct payment.
Very clear about that. So anytime you're talking about trying to accomplish something in Washington, D.C. with Congress, to be frank, it's more likely than not that you're not going to get it done, because it's very difficult to get anything done in Congress. Right. I mean, big, small, across the board. Now, having said that, for 10 plus years, I've been involved in advocacy on Capitol Hill with the executive branch around EB-5, and what I've learned over that time is that timing is everything.
Yeah.
Right now we have this potential opportunity, that the Trump administration has introduced, and we have to do everything we can to make our case now. When it's on the agenda. We may or may not succeed. It took 3 or 4 Congresses to get the Reform and Integrity Act actually passed. I must have edited 100 versions, different pieces of legislation that ultimately became eventually the Reform and Integrity Act. And I'm certainly not alone in that. I mean, there's a whole team effort in the industry. And that may be what we're talking about here. There's no guarantee that the president will even attempt to actually pass the gold card in this Congress. He's got a lot of other things to do.
Right.
He has a war in Ukraine. He has, he's trying to get this huge border, package done. I mean, there's many other priorities, and it's very common for things that are important to the White House to just not make it because there's not enough time. And if that's the case, that means we're going to be doing this again next Congress, and that's what we do.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right. Thank you so much for participating in this podcast today. This has been tremendously enlightening. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in. And now please like and subscribe for more information coming your way. No, not really.